You wake up tomorrow and someone hands you everything. A home, a purpose, a relationship that feels effortless. Every need met before you even feel it. Sounds like a dream. But the real story of the first people to live this way is far stranger than a dream, and it explains something about you that you have probably never noticed. This is the story of Adam and Eve, not the Sunday school version, the version underneath it. Most people picture a garden, maybe an apple, maybe a snake, a simple morality tale about disobedience. But strip away the familiar shorthand and something else appears. A story about the very first decision a human being ever had the freedom to make. And the strange thing? That decision still gets made every single day, by every person alive, including you. To understand why this story matters, you have to understand the world it describes. Ancient Near Eastern people did not write history the way we do today. They wrote in symbols, in patterns, in stories meant to be remembered around fires and passed down for centuries. The book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible, opens with exactly this kind of story. A garden called Eden, 2 trees, 2 people, and 1 rule. The garden itself is described as abundant, rivers running through it, fruit trees as far as the eye can see. The man, Adam, is placed there with a job. Tend the garden, name the animals, walk in relationship with the source of his existence. There is no hunger, no conflict, no fear. For the first time in the story of the universe, there is a being who can think, choose, and reflect, standing in a world built entirely for him. Then comes Eve, formed, the text says, as a counterpart, not a servant, not an afterthought. The Hebrew word used here suggests something closer to a help that corresponds, an equal partner, someone who completes what was incomplete. 2 people, 1 world, total provision. And then 1 rule. Do not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Why would a perfect world need a rule at all? This is where the story gets interesting. Researchers studying ancient religious texts, including biblical scholar John Walton, have pointed out that the tree was never about random fruit. It was about something deeper. Knowledge of good and evil in the Hebrew framework was not simply information. It was the ability to determine for yourself what counts as right and wrong, to sit in the seat of moral authority, to decide. In other words, the 1 rule in paradise was not arbitrary. It was the line between trusting an outside source for what is good and deciding for yourself what is good. Everything else in the garden was freely given. This one thing was withheld, not as punishment, but as definition. It marked the boundary of human authority. Then the serpent enters. Most depictions show a snake whispering temptation, but look closer at the actual wording. The serpent does not lie outright. It asks a question. Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? Notice the shift. God's actual instruction was about 1 tree. The serpent reframes it as restriction from everything. This is not brute deception. This is distortion, a small twist of the truth, just enough to make abundance feel like deprivation. Eve responds. She corrects the exaggeration, but something has already shifted. The conversation has moved the tree from the background of her mind to the center of it. Then the serpent makes its real claim. You will not certainly die, it says. You will be like God, knowing good and evil. Here is the offer, stripped down to its core. You do not need to trust what you were told. You can know for yourself. You can become your own authority. And this is the moment. Not a moment about fruit. A moment about whose voice gets the final word. The text says, Eve saw that the fruit was good for food, pleasing to the eye, and desirable for gaining wisdom. 3 things: physical appeal, aesthetic appeal, and the appeal of self-sufficient understanding. She takes the fruit. She eats. She gives some to Adam, who was, the text notes, with her the entire time. He eats too, and immediately something changes. Not the world around them, something inside them. The text says their eyes were opened, and they realized they were naked. For the first time, they felt exposed, vulnerable, ashamed. They had gained the very knowledge the serpent promised, the ability to judge good and evil for themselves, and the first thing they judged was themselves. And they did not like what they saw. They hide. When the source of their existence comes looking for them, as it apparently had done before in easy companionship, they are not there to meet it. They are hiding behind trees. This detail is easy to miss, but theologians have spent centuries pointing to it. The question asked in the garden is not, "What did you do?" It is, "Where are you?" Not a question about location, a question about relationship. Something that was close has become distant, and it was not the rule giver who moved. What follows is often read as a list of punishments: pain in childbirth, toil in labor, conflict between humanity and the created world. But many scholars, including Old Testament researcher Walter Brueggemann, have framed these less as arbitrary penalties and more as descriptions. This is what life now looks like, once humanity has chosen to define good and evil on its own terms, cut off from the source that originally defined those terms for their benefit. The world does not become evil overnight. It becomes harder, more fractured, more uncertain. And yet, even in this moment, something else happens that often gets overlooked. The text says, God made garments of skin for Adam and Eve before sending them out of the garden. An act of provision in the middle of consequence. Even as the relationship fractures, care does not disappear. So why does this story matter now? Because the choice in the garden was never really about a piece of fruit. It was about authority, about who gets to decide what is good, what is right, what is worth pursuing. And that choice did not end in a garden thousands of years ago. It replays constantly, in much smaller and much more ordinary moments. Every time a person hears something true, something that asks for trust, and instead reaches for a version that feels more comfortable, more self-directed, more convenient, the same basic pattern repeats. Not always with dramatic consequences, but with the same underlying question. Will you trust what you have been told is good? Or will you decide for yourself, even when the evidence around you and the quiet unease inside you suggests otherwise? Psychologists studying decision-making, including behavioral researcher Dan Ariely, have documented how often people rationalize choices after they have already made them, constructing reasons that justify what they wanted to do anyway. Eve's 3 observations, food, beauty, wisdom, sound remarkably like the kind of justifications people still build today after the decision is already leaning one way. This is not a story about a uniquely terrible couple making a uniquely terrible mistake. It is a story about the first time the pattern appeared, a pattern of distorted truth, self-justification, and the quiet ache of distance that follows. A pattern still visible in ordinary life, in small dishonesties, in choices made because they felt good in the moment, even when something deeper warned otherwise. But there is something else in this story, easy to miss beneath the weight of the consequences. The story does not end with abandonment, the garments, the continued presence, even after the door closes. The narrative arc of the entire Bible, many theologians argue, can be read as a long response to this first rupture, an ongoing effort to close the distance that opened that day. So the next time someone hands you something, a choice, a shortcut, a version of the truth that feels just a little more comfortable than the one you were given, pause for a second. Because the real story of Adam and Eve was never just about what they ate. It was about what they trusted. And that question, quiet as it is still being asked.